Okay, so here we go. Here's another story. I'm going to discuss my interactions with David Nelson, get into a little bit of how it originated and took place, but mostly just start off with our encounter and where things basically went from there. So originally I found out November of 22 that I had been criminally charged here in Walton County with something, and November 20th was the morning of my birthday. The warrant had been issued 3 days earlier. So I made arrangements, hired an attorney, established a bondsman, and had all that set up ahead of time. And in the interim of that, I just worked and saved up some money and waited to come down and surrender myself. The reason that I was away in the first place is because the harassment had, gotten to the point where I needed to not be here in Walton County. And it's a shame because I love this place, and I like being outside, obviously, and I hope this doesn't interrupt this video, but I'm going to add some content to some of what I'm telling you as we go, but there are things that I'm likely not going to publicly expose because there is a active federal case in the Northern District Court, Pensacola. So, or I guess it's been set aside without prejudice. So, at 11:15 p.m. May 24th of 23, I went into Walton County jail to surrender myself and buzzed the door a few times, and finally two deputies came out, and in my attempt to surrender, they pulled their phones up and they had the Walton County Sheriff's Department app on there, and I see them scrolling through, looking through the different warrants, I guess, and claiming that I didn't have one. So I also had a piece of paper explaining that I have a hired attorney. I would not be speaking until first appearance, and gave my attorney's information, contacts, email, so on and so forth, even his address in Tallahassee. I then asked to be given the documents and affidavit that generated the warrant that I was there that evening surrendering myself on, and included my identification. So they turned me away. I left. Me and a friend downloaded the Walton County Sheriff's Department app. Upon that, we located the warrant. I contacted the Sheriff's Department, and it was probably around, it says, around, I think it might have been about 1 o'clock, I spoke. Sergeant Hutto had called me back, and in the conversation with Sergeant Hutto, he tells me there was an active warrant. He would meet me up at the jail if I wanted to, and I could surrender myself, and he would explain to the jailers what was going on. So I then gave him a time, but right before that I was making sure that I had a ride, and he continued to, hey, you don't want to run from this, that, and the other thing. Well, I just traveled 1,800 miles, and I had everything set up to do, just what I was supposed to do. So we made an agreement to meet at the jail at 1:45. I arrived at 1:48 and buzzed the door, and waited outside for, it seemed like an hour and a half or so. And eventually, two more deputies appeared, and I showed them the piece of paper that I had with the attorney's information and so on. I'd be exercising my right to remain silent. So they did the pat down, took me into intake, and while in intake, they had me going through the X-ray, and Deputy Brooks then asked me my shoe size, and when he asked me that, I literally walked over and showed him the tongue of my shoe, and then he commented that I was fucking retarded. I made a motion in my ears if I didn't hear him. He said, I understand you're exercising your right to remain silent, but this is fucking stupid. So I went on with that. instead of putting bubbling in yes or no, I wrote attorney on each question up until, I think there might have been 25, 30 questions on that. People are more familiar with that. I don't remember how many there were on there, but there was one that referred to me being in fear or worried that I might be physically assaulted or otherwise by the staff or inmates, I believe. But I wrote, I actually answered yes on that one. So when I slid that out, I was supposed to get, my bag and stuff. And still to this point, I haven't spoken a word. They've been coercing me, trying to get me to, use your words. We know you can talk, use your words. And I think that deputy's name that really kept doing that was Poke, I think, possibly. So as the evening went on, like Lieutenant Locklear repeatedly threatened to, chemically gas me with some agent, and went through the whole, whatever thing she had rehearsed there for, her pledge to gas me. And eventually, come morning, I had repeatedly been told that I was not going to get first appearance, that I had not been cooperative, I hadn't complied, is what they used. And I'm assuming that was when I did the intake form, and exercised my right to remain silent and not say or do anything until I had an attorney present. So come just prior to first appearance, this fellow comes in, he walks up to the door, and towards the hinge side of the door proceeds to ask me, he said, do you know who I am? And I just shook my head no when I looked at his name tag, and it said, Deputy D. Nelson. And he said, well, you should fucking remember me. Repeated different verbal threats towards one of my family members that had been in the jail, I guess a few times, and as well as told me that I had threatened to kill a deputy that was in there. Meanwhile, I tell you, I had not spoke a word, and there's plenty of video and cameras all over that jail to prove so if they wanted to. And I was never charged with any of this, but Locklear apparently was the one that made that complaint. Well, Deputy Nelson then proceeds to, and he, I'm going to give you the language he gave me, but he, just continually reiterated this, was that he was going to rip my limbs off and shove them up my ass. And so eventually he started taking other people that were in there out and handcuffing them for first appearance. I came out, I stood right there, arms to my side, hands out, and he cuffed me as he's in my ear, again repeating that, he'd rip my limbs off, shove them up my ass, brought my relative up again, and he told me that, he didn't have any problem doing this, take care of me in there or out here. Well, as he was finishing up cuffing me, I simply rolled my middle finger up at him, and when I done that, he commenced to slamming me around, beating my ass, contorting my arms, trying to, to rip up a little bit of my shoulder there, but basically tried to reach my left hand around my back because it was cuffed to my other hand and touched my left shoulder blade, and done some damage to my shoulder. But I didn't resist, I didn't do anything of the sort. But as he was doing this, the sadistic bastard continued to tell me that he'd rip my limbs off, he'd shove them up my ass, he'd do it in front of all the cameras, and he didn't give a fuck who was watching. They get me in there, they get me out here. And so he let me up eventually after he was done with me. Even made an attempt to shove my face over the bridge of my nose over the top end of a computer monitor on the counter. Not one other deputy took part in it. They all stood there and watched. There was multiple people that were cuffed behind me watching this, and I'm assuming some of their trustees that were in there cleaning, that's what they were, but they were watching as well. Took us on to first appearance, and I told Judge Nickerson when I finally got up there, the first words I spoke were, "Are we still on the record? Are we still, being recorded?" He said yes, and I told him exactly what David Nelson had just done and said to me. Nothing was done, nothing happened. My bond was made immediately. They held me for hours and hours afterwards. They ended up taking me back in to intake, taking me over, stripping me down again and changing me into red. And by this point I'm talking. I've got my bond made. I've already been through first appearance. Everything's good to go. They need to let me out. So hours and hours passed before they did that. But as he took me over there and changed me into red, he's telling me it was because I made death threats to another deputy there, which I had not done. Still had not done. And so I changed into the red. They put me in a cell. This one doesn't even have a toilet. It just, corners, nothing in it. And they held me there and told me that I was having to wait because they needed to serve me documents from the courthouse. So as I'm waiting, they show up and they serve me. Well, first of all, the two bailiffs were directed out by a deputy that was over in the corner out of my view, out of the room and intake there, and then they came back in later, and instead of serving me, they went over and talked with Locklear, and they lollygagged. I raised a little hell, tapping that hard-ass flip-flop on the window, just tap, 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 tap. You need to go ahead and take care of this, let me out, my bond's been made, you're messing with the program. Of course they don't care, but I wasn't going to give them any peace. So they finally came over, handed the documents through the little tray there. I just tossed them over, but it ended up being a restraining order from 1999 that had recently been altered, like within the last by the time we had figured it out, it was like within the last 48 hours. So it was like a day or two after I had surrendered myself, and we were researching the document and found out that Michael Adkinson had signed off on this. Well, in 1999, he wasn't the sheriff or anything, but he signed off to, whatever modifications were made to this restraining order that was 24 and a half years old at that point, was done at his hand. So at that point, it causes a rift because there are people in that. I wasn't even present for it. I was in South Florida, but they had me checked off as being in the courthouse. I wasn't even aware of it. I had no clue that I was even there, but there were 6 names on it, and one of them was mine. It causes a rift in the family because my grandma's proxies and stuff like that are named in it, which makes it, if there's something going on with her medically, which she's been back and forth to the hospital, and it could cause a potential problem, should this have went on. And they only served 2 people with it, me and my sibling. And this was all in an effort to cause a rift in the family. Lieutenant James Pittman is behind that, and I'll explain in another video where that comes into play with David Nelson and his big mouth. So they served me with this restraining order. A couple hours after that, they finally let me out. I immediately go over to records, make a request for the video for the time where I was assaulted, up to the time I was assaulted, and I think 30 minutes, after I left, and when I was first surrendering. Not got that video. Shortly after that, I filed another federal lawsuit against Michael Adkinson.
His potential risk to everybody we think is off the chart. The problem is I can't go advertising that to you because I'll get sued out of my mind because he technically has not done anything yet. Do I consider him a danger to this community? 100% I do.
And David Nelson and Lieutenant Locklear. So that's what was going on afterwards. But David Nelson then, in the past period since this has happened, his threats have rang true. The entire time I was going to court on this case, I would be required to come back every 3 to 4 weeks. I did so, for the case in total went on for 14 months and 3 weeks. It was a misdemeanor. I put in my own motion, eventually requested the video. My first attorney requested the video and body cam from all this, and I got a public pretender, tried to do the same thing, I guess, and she was just pushing it to go to trial without all the evidence there. They're refusing. I hired another attorney. We get the video evidence, and on December 18th, I showed up for court. All the evidence was dropped. And then come December 24th at 12:15 a.m., the Walton County Sheriff's Department proceeded to use our front yard as a derby track, with multiple vehicles tearing up the lawn, spinning out on the septic tank, spinning out in the driveway, back and forth in and out of the property. Never once coming up and knocking on a door of either residents that are on that property. Not once trying to make a phone call, alert anybody or anything, just simply tore it up. We have video cameras all over the place, and I can assure you I put them up myself, and it was not because we were worried about your regular everyday community criminals. We're worried about the actual Sheriff's Department and Defuniak Springs City Police Department that are continually doing and committing this harassment, this torment to me, and because of what they're doing to me, they then lay it off on my family, my grandmother, and everybody else, and ultimately just committing malicious alienation of my children. But when the evidence was dropped, Christmas Eve, the yard was tore up. We had Sergeant come in, sit down at the table, and I'll put a little bit of that video throughout here. And then he proceeds to tell us that there was no call out there. You know, again, like in the other video with the registered sex offender and the city detective that lived down the road, this GPS issue with them seems to be a serious problem. Their mapping is off because they claim that over here where I'm at, Gene Hurley Road, is where the sergeant was led to when he punched in the address that the other deputies supposedly were supposed to be reporting to just a few hours before Christmas Eve morning. But nonetheless, this was 15 feet from where I was sleeping that night. My grandmother was harassed by this. She was stressed out. She's been having heart and blood pressure problems for a minute now, and this has increased. And again, I can show where Lieutenant James Pittman has a direct line to that, and one of his own deputies has released that information to the public in more than 2 or 3 cases with citizens that have reached out to me and told me about what's been shared with them by David Nelson. So, Mr. Adkinson, you're what can I say here? You're sodomy addicted deputy there, that rapist with a badge. David Nelson has a very big mouth, and maybe it's a beer or two gets into me, just likes to talk, but there's no telling what else this sick bastard does. I see couples photos all the time on Facebook, and this guy's got one of a donkey, and I can imagine the look on his face. I'll share that with you too. It's probably the same one he gets when he's violating other inmates and people getting processed through that jail in Walton County. But nonetheless, I have reported this to Internal Affairs. I reported it to the FDLE. The FDLE notified me that they were going to send it back to the Walton County Internal Affairs, and instead it went right back to Michael Adkinson, which was named in it. So after my release, I had targeted traffic stops that the detective that I show in another video there that lives down at the end of Huckabee Road, works for the City Police Department, will call in to Melissa Malbach / Newsom or other dispatchers and deploy city police. So far, multiple occasions, it's been Sergeant Cook. He's actually done traffic stop on me, ran the dope dog around my truck, said it alerted, stripped my truck, never found a single thing in it. But nonetheless, he's been at the grocery store when I went up there for my grandmother's things on multiple occasions, parked over to the side of the store. Melissa Molbach's been attached to, anything that I pulled up from their records. Even the traffic stop that Mr. Cook did on me kind of falls in line with the threats from David Nelson, and as does the deputies, and likely James Pittman was involved in it as well, but they were definitely under his watch here on the north end, and he is the lieutenant for this area. So ultimately the charges were all dropped on me towards the end of January the following year, and I have since just continued to hear about David Nelson sharing his version of what took place, and as well sharing that I have, in his own words, I have a lawsuit against the Walton County Sheriff's Department and DCF for Walton County Sheriff's Department's incursion into my child custody, and they're working with the DCF. Most directly would be Lee Berry, who would have been the one that initiated this a couple years back, and he's since been transferred to animal control, and then went on to retire or resign or whatever happened there. But this story is about you, David Nelson, you sick, sadistic, sodomy, dreaming, rapist, disgusting individual. You're horrible. It just falls in line with the regime of the panty sniffing sheriff that you take orders from, and I'm sure that's who you're referring to when you said you would do all of that in front of the camera and watch. And may I add, when I was taken back into intake after telling the judge what happened, he did walk through that room raising his arms and shouting loudly. I don't give a fuck that he told the judge what I was going to do. I just wish he would have got it right. I'm shoving his arms up his ass, not my own. And maybe in my, adrenaline rush and everything else of just having my ass beat in handcuffs and, told that I was going to be, delimbed, amputated, and then those limbs used to sodomize me. Should I live through all that? Maybe he's raping my dead body, the sick bastard. David, you are a nasty, nasty, nasty individual. That's Deputy David Nelson of the Walton County Jail. So, that said, I did message David Nelson, and I gave him an invite. We could use this park. We can sign waivers. We can do it all legal. This isn't a threat to me, from me to you, saying that I'm going to come out and do anything or catch you in public or anything like that. I want to do it legitimately, where nobody's catching a criminal charge, nobody's in handcuffs, and you're not going to sit there and try to stick anything up my ass or anybody else's with, I imagine, the crowd we could gather here. We could do it as a fundraiser for a good cause, and maybe we do it for, victim advocacy. Something like that. People that are, raped and sodomized and, sexually abused, things like that. And I'm being completely serious. I've told you, you didn't bother to want to answer me, but you tell everybody in town your version of the story. So I'm telling you right now, you pansy little shithead. We can come right out here, sign the paperwork, put up a little ring right here, and we can go hand to hand, and you'll see what I can do without cuffs on. And I mean that. You're going to sit here and run your mouth around town when I can't see my children, and the story that they're going to hear about their father is a dead ass lie coming out of a sick, nasty son of a bitch like you. That is not what's going to happen. We can come right out here and we can handle it. Both of us sign waivers. If you happen to whoop my ass, then so be it, you whoop my ass. But we're going to do it out here, and you ain't going to have me restrained. And you're not going to be doing it with the backup of your sick ass piece of shit panty sniffing sheriff that signed that warrant, as well as the deputy that went out there, done the investigation, and in her own body camera footage sat there and said that none of it was criminal, none of it was illegal, none of this information should have been released to the public, so the person reporting it to her shouldn't have even had my name. Now, how did that happen? Melissa Mulbach, Newsom. Then we can go into just the fact that, Michael Adkinson went right on Facebook Live and said that he had just arrested this person. Technically, he had done nothing wrong, but he was going to treat him as such. I'll put that clip of video in here too, because
that it happens a lot. We deal with a lot of, some of them scare us, quite frankly. We have some of them that scare us, that we go, hey, look, man, this is very, and we have some of them go, this kid's just a knucklehead, or this kid's got troubles, but there's some of them that do scare us. They really, really do. Corey and I had a kind of a discussion last week about somebody that we had to take some action against. We arrested the individual. His charge, not necessarily that serious. His potential risk to everybody, we think, is off the chart. The problem is I can't go advertising that to you because I'll get sued out of my mind, because he technically has not done anything yet. Do I consider him a danger to this community? 100% I do. 100% I do. And we're going to try and treat him that way to the best of our ability. But there's that balance between what I know and what I can prove. And I have to, we're a country, we follow by the rules of law. Yeah. We said that, talking about the rule of law, I'll touch off on this.
Every one of you out there are dealing with this. If you're going through that courthouse, you need to know that even the sheriff doesn't abide by the law, doesn't abide by civil or constitutional rights. So when you're out there voting, think about that. When you got the choice of Murray or Osborne, get Adkinson out of there. You cannot have that man running this place and he's sitting there arresting, issuing warrants on people that have technically done nothing wrong. Because he feels the way he does, he's going to treat those individuals as he chooses to. And he's exercised that. There's cases that Alabama Beacon News just released a story that has a lot of cases in there that just show the regime of Adkinson, McMillan, and all of these people, that have just used their badge and their gun to run around and intimidate people and make the community feel inferior to them. And we should not be allowing this. Again, David Nelson, we can come right out here, we can settle it up, walk away. I won't ever shake your hand. You're just a disgusting pig. So that's my story on David Nelson. I'll try to get this posted this evening. Thank you.